Democratic legislators in the great state of Texas did something that's honestly a little unexpected of Democratic lawmakers. They successfully blocked a voter suppression bill in the state. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have defeated the legislation and we don't have anything to worry about, because Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, is calling for another special session in order to pass the bill, and he is threatening state lawmakers for what they have done. So the Texas bill, which you should know, it's known as Senate Bill 7, passed the Senate along party lines early Sunday after an all-night debate. The bill came up in the House for a final approval Sunday evening. And this is where things start to get good. Now, after hours of this debate and delaying tactics, the chamber adjourned after Democratic lawmakers left in protest, breaking a quorum and ending debate. At least 100 legislators must be present to conduct business. So this effectively blocked the passage of the legislation, and that's really important, especially when you read the details about what the proposed legislation would do. As NBC News reports, the sweeping bill would limit voting hours, make it more difficult to vote by mail, and empower partisan poll watchers. The final version would also preserve the elimination of 24-hour polling stations and drive-through voting centers, both of which Harris County, the state's largest Democratic stronghold, introduced last year in an election that had record turnout. And remember, the last thing GOP lawmakers want to do, both on a state and national level, is make it easier for people to vote. They don't want to expand voting rights. They want to ensure that it's more of an obstacle to decrease the number of people voting. The bill would also prohibit Sunday voting before 1 p.m., which critics said was an attack on what is commonly known as souls to the polls, a get out the vote campaign used by Black church congregations nationwide. Gee, I wonder why. Now, before I get to the threats by Governor Greg Abbott, I do want to bring you in, Ryan, because this is clearly a tactic used in many red states, or in states that flipped from Republican to Democrat, effectively voting for Biden over Trump. And so Republican lawmakers are freaking out about that, and they're trying to restrict voting.
Right, and what Republicans are doing is super complicated in the text of the legislation, but underneath it all, it's quite simple. They try to figure out where Democrats vote, when they vote, and what method they use to vote, and then they restrict all three of those. And so they've realized that they use mail more than Republicans do, because Trump told them not to use the mail, so they're restricting the mail. They use early voting and early voting drop-off locations, and so they're restricting those. And they note, because Democrats have more working class voters, that have to vote outside of the kind of 9 to 5 that you can get to the polls at. They saw that Democrats are voting, before and after that, and on weekends, and so they're restricting that as well. And so that's how they can try to claim that what they're doing is legal. And it's worth remembering that if they tried to do this before 2013, when John Roberts eviscerated the Voting Rights Act, it would have been tossed out. A state like Texas was not allowed to change its election laws without the approval of the Department of Justice, since the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed precisely for this reason, because they target minority voters.
So Abbott is now calling for another special sessions in order to ensure the passage of this legislation. Republicans stop at nothing to ensure they get what they want. So I'm predicting that in the end, it's likely that Texas will pass this legislation. And in regard to the Democratic lawmakers who effectively blocked it, at least for the time being, Abbott has issued a threat saying, I will veto Article 10 of the budget passed by the legislature. Article 10 funds the legislative branch. No pay for those who abandon their responsibilities. Stay tuned. What are your thoughts on that, Ryan? What's the likelihood of Abbott actually employing this tactic to ensure the passage of that legislation?
Well, it also feels like a huge separation of powers issue to start trying to attack the legislature in that way. But Republicans have gone, outside of the norms of, traditional, democratic discourse, and for years now. So I certainly wouldn't put it past him. The way that Democrats did this is the same way that legislators in Oregon, Republican legislators in Oregon, did it to Democrats there. Fleeing so that there's no quorum is one of the oldest tricks in the book. There's nothing unusual about it. And Texas has this system where if you don't pass the legislation by midnight at the end of a particular session, then it's dead. If you remember, I think it was like 2010 or so, the reason that Wendy Davis became famous, she grabbed the floor in her little pink sneakers, and there was something like 6 hours left until midnight, and they shouldn't have let her get the floor, but somehow she maneuvered parliamentarily to grab it, and then she just stood there talking all the way up until midnight. And there's this dramatic moment where they basically break all of the rules right at midnight and kind of gavel her down and say that she's lost the floor, and say that and then they quickly pass the legislation. But by the time they pass it on video, you can see that it's now like midnight and 30 seconds or something like that. And so the clock had expired, and so it died. And if you remember, they called a special session not long after that and passed it. So it was an adrenaline rush for Democrats, and it was a huge win to see them actually fight for something. But in the same way that Abbott is likely to get this through, they still managed to get those abortion restrictions through.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And I love that you mentioned Wendy Davis, because that's the situation that I had in the back of my mind as I was reading about what the Democrats in the state legislature did with this voter suppression law. At the end, GOP lawmakers got exactly what they wanted with that restrictive abortion legislation at the time that Davis did that filibuster. And so, when Republicans want something, they will do anything and everything to get it. And so I have no doubt that they will have that special session, and it is likely that they'll pass it, which of course brings you to the, I think, ultimate question in regard to not just Texas, but all the other states that are passing these restrictive voting laws. What is the Democratic Party gonna do to succeed in pushing back against it? Because we don't have the Supreme Court, as you mentioned, Ryan, has gutted the Voting Rights Act. So unfortunately, we don't have the same oversight by the Supreme Court that we did previously in regard to these types of bills. And then on the other hand, you have a problem in terms of reforming our elections overall. You have the Democratic Party attempting on a federal level to pass what's known as HR 1 or For the People Act, which would, in my opinion, in the most comprehensive way, reform our elections by getting money out of politics, ensuring that we have publicly funded elections, ensuring that we mitigate some of these voter suppression laws that are passing in various states. But in order to do that, you would need 60 senators to sign on to it in the Senate. And we're not gonna get that because the Senate is split 50-50 and Republicans are not in favor of doing away with voter suppression. They love voter suppression. And Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat, is unwilling to do away with the Senate filibuster. So we're backed up into a corner, partly because we have some Democratic lawmakers in the Senate aiding and abetting the bad behavior of Republican lawmakers.
Right, there's only, as far as I can tell, 3 different options. One, you swarm the ballot box, so you win by, if you win by 10%, then maybe you win by, 0.5%. You challenge these laws in district court and circuit court. You're not going to win at the Supreme Court, quite obviously, and you're not going to win at a lot of district and circuit courts. But Democrats did quite well. Against Donald Trump's Stop the Steal effort. They won pretty much every case, and they won it with in a lot of cases with Trump judges sitting on the bench. So if Republicans have been sloppy enough, they can win some challenges here and there, but that's just nibbling at the edges. Like you said, the only actual serious response is HR 1 that just straight up bans this stuff. And in order to do that, they're going to have to persuade Manchin to get behind reforming the filibuster. And this is one of those situations that's interesting. Like, if you talk to Republicans don't have any faith in Joe Manchin in protecting the filibuster. Like they to them, he's already gone. Like to them, he's just playing games here. He's teasing Republicans with all of this talk about bipartisanship and he's eventually going to side with Democrats and blow up the filibuster. Like that's what the majority of Republicans in Washington are convinced of. If you talk to Democrats, they think that Manchin's an unmovable supporter of the filibuster, and there's just no way that he's going to get around to that. If you talk to Democrats inside Congress, a lot of them are like, look, Manchin said that he would never do a partisan COVID relief bill up until the moment that he said, well, Republicans won't work with us, so I'm going to do a partisan COVID relief bill through reconciliation. It's going to be $1.9 trillion, and I'm going to trim $100 a week off of the unemployment benefits, and that's what I'm going to call my victory. So,
yeah, but I mean,
there's
Manchin,
two different views of Manchin.
Yeah. Look, I hope that Democrats are right. I'm certainly far more pessimistic than they are because he has been asked almost on a daily basis about the filibuster and he remains firm in not wanting to even reform it. But who knows, maybe he'll have his moment of awakening and he'll realize that the Republican Party has no interest in making bipartisan deals. And obviously, I mean, you noted it, but I want to emphasize the fact that Manchin succeeded in getting the Democratic Party to agree to all sorts of disgusting, unnecessary concessions on behalf of the Republican Party, and not a single Republican lawmaker voted in favor of the coronavirus relief bill. So, right. I'm sorry, what he did in trimming the unemployment benefits, implementing additional and unnecessary means testing as part of the relief package, I don't think deserves any credit. And so in the end, yes, he voted in favor of it, but he needs to acknowledge the fact that after making all these concessions to Republicans, not a single one of them voted with Democrats, not a single one of them had interest in working with the Democratic Party. And the fact that he's still delusional enough, or at least pretends to be delusional enough to believe that Republicans could work with him moving forward is just, it's infuriating.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.